Welcome to the Susan Brender Show. It's all about you. Featuring shows on health and wellness, the performing arts, politics, and people who inspire you to be your very best. And now, here's Susan Brender.
I'm Susan Brender, and this is the Susan Brender Show. My guest today is Mr. F.H. Buckley, who teaches at Scalia Law School and is the author of The Republican Workers' Party, How the Trump Victory Drove Everyone Crazy and Why It Was Just What We Needed. You know, that's a wonderful title, Mr. Buckley. I have to tell you, I think anybody who sees this will say right away, this is right on. Let's get this book. Now, I want to tell you that when you wrote politics has become boring again, and that's a relief. That's what resonated with me. Now, I want to know, do you think that the facts or opinions of ideas on platforms is not as important as boredom?
Well, I think boredom is useful because it trains us to be curious, to want something new. And we're at a point in our politics right now where we really do need something new. Here it is, it's 2019. Pretty much everybody I know politically is stuck on 2016. We haven't moved on. And, nothing's going to happen. We need a real course correction, which was the point of my book. And we're stalled, and people are just kind of lying down and fulminating and refighting the battle of 2016 instead of moving on. And I think at that point, it's wise not to enter into the fury of it all, but to chill.
Yeah, but when you talk about chilling, I've been in situations, and I'm going to talk about this in a personal manner because I'm absolutely shocked when I see the kind of divisiveness that exists today. People hate Trump. I mean, some people absolutely despise the man, and then there are others who just say, oh, yeah, Trump is doing so many fabulous things for us. He's a great guy. In fact, I'll give you an example. My husband asked me to attend something called the Club 45. And, I don't take a position. I'm a journalist, and I have to be open-minded to things. But I feel that I also need to be educated. I mean, we're not alone in this. People need more education. And so I attend this with him because there are some fabulous speakers. And the rah-rah of the people in the audience of speaking about Trump, that he's like the next thing since, sliced bread or God, if you will. So you have these two different opinions, and it doesn't seem to be boring to many of them. They just continue to try to really say as much as they can, some of which is hatred and some of which is that they love the man.
I think what's happening is we're over-invested in our passions. We're over-invested economically and we're over-invested emotionally. And our leaders are contributing to this. I mean, I was one of those people who didn't mind the fact that Trump was outrageously rude in the campaign. But then I thought governing's a different matter, and I expected a different persona, or I hoped for a different persona, and we didn't see it. And what he's done is, he simply doubled down on all of the things which enrage people. And from the other side, equal and opposite reaction. A good example is what's going on right now. The Mueller report has been released to the Attorney General, Robert Barr, and he issued a 4-page summary, and we're waiting for the full thing. And he's not permitted to issue the full thing. I mean, I'll give you one little tip. One of the reasons why he's not releasing the whole thing is because some of the stuff in there concerns foreign allies and their espionage apparatus. And we don't want to reveal that. So he can't do it. But, meanwhile, the Democrats, having realized that they entirely blew 2 years of dialogue by investing in, collusion craziness,
Sure.
Now they're going crazy on the subject of release the full report. It's a scandal. We don't get the whole thing. And it's not a scandal. It's just, the Attorney General doing what he has to do. But the idea is we don't do politics without trying to say that the other side is evil incarnate and we're on the side of truth and justice. And deals don't get cut that way. Things don't happen. And it's really sad. And I think emotionally it would be well for us to say, this is all craziness and I'm not going to have any part with it.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to go back into some of the things that were in your article, and I have a question for you that relates to McCain. Does the fact that Mr. McCain, who is no longer with us, had a mean streak reflect on his losing the presidency? What do you think about that?
I think he always had a mean streak from what I know of the guy. I don't mind, I remember when people said that Bob Dole was, had a mean streak or was too angry, and I thought, well, golly, I think that's kind of lovable. He's a real person. I didn't he had a cruel wit, basically. Dole did.
Yeah.
And McCain as well. McCain could laugh at himself.
Yeah.
Trump picking on McCain was a self-inflicted wound that Trump gave himself.
Yeah, and he has a tendency to do that a lot. This is not the only thing that he's done. Now, let's talk a little bit about the media, because the media, and I was part of the media for a long time with stations like CNBC, MSNBC, WBIS. I worked for those stations, and I knew very well that we were given stories to tell by our executive producers. We didn't have a choice. We had to kind of write about it or speak about it, help the hosts of our shows really get into political issues. And some of the issues were really quite a debate, and they were done because that was what brought in the ratings. Now, Mr. Trump, he's a perfect person to bring in ratings because, again, we're back to the fact that people either hate the man or they love the man, and the media is just playing on that. What do you feel about the media?
Well, they're reacting in an economical manner by publicizing stories that'll bring in readers. The good example of that is the ratings increase in papers like the Washington Post and the New York Times, and they've given a name to it. They call it the Trump bounce. I mean, a couple of years back, there were all sorts of worries about how those newspapers would fold and they'd be losing staff and so on. And that's happened to a lot of papers, obviously. But it's not happened at the Post because of Jeff Bezos, and it's not happened at the New York Times. And the reason is they're bringing in readers with the tantalizing scoops they promise us, right? Rachel Maddow is a good example of that. I mean, every day for 2 years, she was trying to connect the dots, and as it turned out, we discovered there was nothing to connect. But yet, for a long time, she was really on the top of the ratings, or very near the top. And, it was absolutely great. Her smirky face led people to believe that she had access to secret information that nobody else did, and she could put it all together. And it was all a fraud. It was simply a fraud that brought in good ratings. And you kind of hope that people will grow up, viewers will grow up and say, wait a minute, we were cheated for 2 years by these people. We're not going to believe them again. But then we tend to forget about this. So my advice in all of this is, with all of the hatreds and all of the almost mendacity, politics has gotten rather boring, and it's time to chill out, as I said before. I mean, Trump, for example, wants to keep everybody in a white heat of passion, and that's boring too.
Yeah, so. It is. And something, you also indicated that Trump won because he ridiculed his rivals, poked fun at his protesters, and mocked Hollywood.
Yeah. Yeah, no, he actually has a sense of humor. The problem is the people who report on him, either don't have a sense of humor or they choose not to think that he's joking. But he said a lot of things obviously in jest, and they were taken as real threats, and they weren't meant to be such. Basically,
Yeah.
this is a pretty rude, bumptious guy. He's the most obnoxious guy in the locker room, right? And then he attracts attention. Now, we needed something like that in 2016 to shake things up, but here it is 3 years later, and things did get shaken up a little bit. There was tax reform, but a lot of stuff is stalled, and we well know nothing's going to happen for another 2 years.
Well, I'm not going to ask you for your prediction as yet, but we will get to that. So is it too much like The Boy Who Cried Wolf? Is that what we're dealing with right now?
That's certainly true of Rachel Maddow. Her ratings are down. I mean, she promised, she didn't deliver. It's The Boy Who Cried Wolf. I don't know if the same thing will be true of the Washington Post or the New York Times. We'll wait to see it. If there was a Trump bounce, there should be a Trump deflation to follow. We'll wait to see if that happens.
And do you think that the people who are bored with the business as usual seem to have settled in?
You mean the guys who've tuned out? Have they settled into not paying
Correct.
attention?
That's right.
Well, I think after a while that's the case. I mean, I'm here in roughly D.C. I'm in Alexandria, Virginia, and this is kind of a hothouse atmosphere. People worry about politics all the time. Mm-hmm. Although right now, mostly it's about careerists. Mostly it's about who's got this job or who's going where or, who's on this committee, which is strictly inside the Beltway stuff. I think, in much of America, I would think there's got to be a lessened interest in stories about collusion. I mean, that's gone. How can you gin up a story about Robert Barr taking an extra couple of days to release a report? I mean, why is that really newsworthy?
Because I'm going to answer that in my opinion. And my opinion again is that it's all about the media. The media has to keep on going at it and going at it and going at it, and if they don't do that, their ratings are not good. So, any little tidbit of information that they could kind of get their hands on, they really pursue it and they go at it they really go at it. And I think it's really, from my standpoint, it's really sad. And I have a suspicion based upon what you've written, you feel the same way.
Yeah, no, I quite agree. I mean, I think it's absolutely amazing how the media pivoted from there is collusion to there is no collusion, but there's a cover-up. I mean, it's just, look, I worked on the campaign. I knew, for example, that on the campaign we were really interested in a reset with Russia. I think the failure to get that reset based on all this media stories about a non-existent collusion scandal really hurt the United States. But the thing is, when Trump announced that he wanted a reset with Russia, he did it in a press. I was there. He did it in a speech that was covered by everybody in the media, and all the outrageous stuff he said, he does it on Twitter. If there's some kind of underhanded thing cover up going on, normally you don't publicize it, to
exactly.
Millions of followers, right?
Yeah.
So it is the case that I think sensible people at this point are saying to themselves, okay, look, we allowed ourselves to get carried away a little bit, but it's not 2016 any longer, and let's get over that.
Yeah. Now, let's talk a little bit about your book because, the Republican Workers' Party, how the Trump victory drove everyone crazy and why it was just what we needed. What inspired you to write that book? You said you were part of the campaign. There
was one little factoid that got me, and that is around 2014 it was reported that for the first time Americans no longer thought their kids would have it better than they did. And that's the great American dream. It disappeared. It didn't just disappear. It moved to other countries that are more mobile than we are. And when I looked at that, I realized, that's, first of all, seems to me to be the key issue here. politically. I mean, that's the cause of the unrest. And nobody's responding to it, right? The Democrats talk a good game about trying to fix things, but they support all the policies that make us immobile and unequal. And as for the Republicans and Mitt Romney and his 47% of takers, they were too delicate to get involved in those kinds of politics. They called it class warfare. And then along comes Trump, and he blows everybody away in both parties. And so my book was written really to comment on the need to reinvent politics by destroying the policies of both parties.
So let's look at the scene, if you will. I want you to set the scene for us. And with regard to politics, now, in a short time, and time goes very fast, there's going to be another election. So I don't know if you want to give me your prediction, but if you do, I'd like to hear it.
Well, it's going to be real simple, I think. We don't know the answer yet. It's too early for a prediction, but here's how you tell. If the Democrats end up nominating somebody who appeals only to their base, some of the bomb throwers, then I think Trump will be reelected. On the other hand, if the Democrats get smart, I'm not going to mention candidates. There are some of the people out there who are, kind of empty suits in my view, but at least they project a more innocent, less hating version of democratic politics. They'd stand a better chance. I think what the country would really like is to return to the idea of a unifying president, an FDR, a Ronald Reagan, a John Kennedy, somebody who's not, FDR was a pretty good hater, but somebody not conspicuous as a hater. Yeah. I think we'd like to have a respite from the emotions and a return to good policy. Yeah, well, social media thrives on those people in their audience who want that kind of passion for the most part. I mean, you don't get a lot of followers by saying, well, things are more or less okay here, and let's not go crazy and all of that. No, the social media tends to cater to people who say treason, conspiracy, pure evil, right? I mean, so the thing about that is, do the followers on social media represent the American people? I mean, it's like they're the only game in town, but they aren't, right? The only game in town is really what happens in the election. And some of the crazies on social media ultimately count for little, even if they have 100,000 or 1 million followers.
Yeah, but you're a professor at Scalia Law School, and so you're probably come in contact with a number of younger people who certainly, if they want to be part of the law, they want to know a little bit about politics. So I'm curious as to know how they respond to politics today, because young people don't seem to be involved. I haven't seen any young people nor spoken to any young people with regard to how they feel about Trump or they feel about politics in general.
Well, Scalia Law School is a little special. It's a fairly right-of-center law school, there aren't many of them. I'm on the outside of the faculty because they're all libertarians, and I'm not libertarian. I'm much more middle of the road. As for our students, many of them self-select because it's a conservative school. I teach night courses by preference. Our school is about 2 miles from the Pentagon, and about half my students are military. Okay,
really?
They're night students and they're military, and these are basically the best kids in America, and they're just solid people, and many of them are conservative, but none of them are crazy.
I'm going to tell you, I know we don't have a lot of time, but I just want to tell you a little story. Years ago, when I was working in TV, I got a request, and the request was to try to get Mr. Trump on our show. And what happened at that particular time was Trump was actually running for president. So, of course, all the shows wanted to get him on, and they asked me, they said, Susan, get him on. So I phoned his office, and I spoke to his secretary, and I said to his secretary, we'd love to have Trump on our show. And she started to laugh. And
Really?
Yeah. And I said, no, I don't know why you're laughing. I mean, I think it's just an ordinary request. And she said, well, it's a joke. That's how she ended the conversation, Mr. Buckley. It's a joke. At that particular time...
I'm not sure what she was referring to, though. Was she referring to Trump's campaign or to... I think I know the lady. I perhaps know the lady you're talking about.
Well,
who's
we're
just
not going to mention names.
A solid, Rona Graff, a very sensible, nice lady.
Yeah, well, I won't mention names, and it's a long time ago. And
I suspect it wasn't the person I know, so, maybe you caught some 25-year-old assistant. So.
Yeah, it could be.
Maybe you caught a millennial. What do you expect?
Yeah, exactly. What do you expect? No, the person actually wasn't a millennium. She was an older woman who had been with Trump for a long time. But the reason I think that she laughed is because he wasn't serious about actually running for president. He put his name out there, and it was a couple of times that he did that, if you're aware. And,
was that after he descended that staircase in Trump Tower? Or?
Correct. And so, it was like, it's a joke. I was like shocked. It's a joke.
Yeah.
But it was a joke to them at the time.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if she was still around, actually. But, what can I say? You encounter rude people, brush it off.
Yeah, well, I think you're right. Now, last but not least, I always like to have my guests have the last word, and I think I didn't really tell people about you. So finishing up this interview, I would love people to know a little bit about you and what's in store for you in the future, and are you going to get involved in politics and do more and write more and whatever. I would like to know, and I want people to know Frank Buckley.
I was born in Canada. I became a citizen in 2014, although I've lived here for much longer than that. I got involved in the Trump campaign writing speeches. That was simply an accident, and I don't expect I'll be doing that again. I have another book coming out January 2020 on the idea of American secession. We are so divided at this point that we might ask ourselves if secession is possible, and I say, oh yeah, very much so. And in fact, because it's possible, we should be doing things to try to unify ourselves. And that apart, as for the Republican Workers' Party, I described some pathologies in American politics in 2016, and they're still there. They never went away.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you think people will take away from your book that is very important at this stage of the game?
Well, I try to get my finger on what it is precisely that bothers Americans. And it's economics. It's the fact that the jobs disappeared, that people weren't thinking about jobs. But it's also a question of respect. I mean, the major media outlets thought that most Americans were rubes and vulgar, racist, and really just generally horrible, no good people. And surprisingly, they noticed. So my favorite story is what happened in one district in 2016, Harlan County, Kentucky. And Harlan County is sacred ground to the left. It's where the Harlan County wars were fought. It's a coal mining area. It voted for Obama in 2008, and in 2016 it gave 85% of its votes to Trump.
Wow.
So that's the revolution in American politics. All of that which was left has now been abandoned by elite liberals, and they're the future of American politics.
Well, that's a good way to end the show. My guest today has been F.H. Buckley, the author of The Republican Workers' Party, How the Trump Victory Drove Everyone Crazy and Why It Was Just What We Needed. And I want to thank you, Mr. Buckley, for being on the Susan Brender Show. You've enlightened us, and I think that people will find your next book great. And you said, do you have a name for the next book so that people can...
We're still talking about it, but the word secession will be in there somewhere.
Well, thank you very much again for
Thanks
being
so
on
much.
the
It was
Susan
great
Brender
talking.
Show.
Thank you for listening to The Susan Brender Show. To be a guest, email sebrender@yahoo.com.